Hello, Brian here, Theoretical Gamer. This is going to be called, I guess you could call it In Defense of Diceless. I've talked about Diceless a lot, and in Hangouts and in various other videos, and I'm gonna focus on that because some people are okay with Diceless, some people really like some Diceless games, and some people are just viscerally opposed to it. The idea is that, and I think people who are really opposed to it it's a kind of a fear reaction, the kind of people that need the warm embrace of a rule system to protect them from abuse by evil game masters. The best way to start is with the question: what is a role-playing game? You ask a bunch of gamers this, and you'll get a bunch of different answers, and it's always the case of some people will say, oh, it's they'll describe a dungeon crawl. Some people will say it's an in-depth exploration of the inner self and improv acting and trying to explore a new character someone who is not yourself. And some people could say, well, you can just play Fightor the Fighter and just go in and kick some orc butt and still have a great time. Role-playing games can be all those things. They can be just a fun night of orc bashing. They can be in-depth, exploring a new character. It can be, having fun exploring the world that the game master has put you in, solving puzzles. It can be all that. But what is it itself? And I think the only way to do it is the practical definition. Is a bunch of dudes or girls, a bunch of people sitting around, and one person is the game master, or dungeon master, or referee, or storyteller, or hollyhock god, or whatever description you want to come up with. The others are players. Now, there are some indie games like Fiasco that go off in different directions and do the GM-less one-shot thing. And I love me some Fiasco. It's a great game. I'll play it anytime. But it's not a standard role-playing game the way we all know it. What it is you've got the game master, and everyone gets a player, and every player gets a character. And then basically the players say, okay, the game master says, this is the world that you're in. This is what's happening to you. This is who you're talking to. This is who's attacking you. This is what you see. The players take that and react to it. They tell what their character would do or say. The game master then takes that and tells how the world reacts to what they just did. And so a game is played. It can, sometimes it can be a great story, sometimes it can just be a fun night, but that's the core of it. Everything else is just, trying to figure out how. Because sometimes there's going to be questions. Sometimes, it's like, okay, my character attacks this guy. How do we determine who wins and who loses? Well, traditionally, it's been dice. Some games use decks of cards. Stuff like that. But when it comes down to it, okay, let's say, if you say you wake up in the morning, my character gets out of bed. The game master, in any sane game, is not going to say, make a get out of bed roll. Okay, I succeeded. You get out of bed. Okay, I walk down the stairs. Make a walk down the stairs roll. Ooh, I just missed. Your character trips and falls on his face. I've heard stories about game masters who will make you roll dexterity to walk downstairs because usually sad teenagers who just want to humiliate their friends, and they don't last. They either grow up or no one plays with them anymore. But for the most part, you don't roll for these things. Yeah, there's a game out there, and I've done a review of it called Unknown Armies. without going into detail, one of the aspects of the skills is you have some skills. You have some of them are made up, some of them are set for every character. They're percentile. They range from 1 to 100. Usually, like 70 is going to be the practical maximum anyone is going to have. That's going to be like, it is theoretically possible to go higher than that if you're like super, like, but you're verging on the superhuman. All right. So let's say you have the skill of auto mechanic. Now, according to the rules, if you have a skill of 15% or higher, you automatically succeed at any what they call minor skill check, which basically means if there's nothing on the line and there's no real stakes, there's no bullets whizzing over your head, you succeed. So it's like, okay, my character is going to, do a tune-up on his car. Okay, well, he goes to AutoZone, he gets the parts he needs. He spends the day listening to music, drinking a beer, and just working on his car. Okay, the car is fixed. It takes a bit of time, but you succeed. Because your character has, say, 20% in auto mechanics, and he's good at it. He's good at it, and he can do any normal thing on the car. I had a friend back when I was up in Indiana, and I only heard about this secondhand through another friend who played in an Unknown Armies game with him, that my friend ran a game of Unknown Armies, and it was terrible because he wanted people to roll for everything. Right? So all of a sudden, that guy who has 20% in auto mechanics has an 80% chance of not being able to tune up his car. And if he had, say 80% in auto mechanics, if he was like one of the greatest auto mechanics in the world, could like design cars in his head before breakfast, was like an absolute master to the point where he was like almost superhuman, he still would have a 20% chance of not being able to do a tune-up on his own car. Right? Because you would have to he wasn't a bad guy. You would say, I'm sure that you would say, I think this is a minor skill check. Shouldn't I succeed automatically? Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, and then the next time you had to roll, okay, roll it. Isn't this a minor skill check? Oh, yeah, you're right. He just couldn't get. It's like tools. The rules are a tool, and you learn when not to use it. You don't roll for making breakfast. You don't roll for walking up and down stairs. You don't roll. You might have a drive car skill, but you don't roll just to drive to work and back. You roll when you're doing crazy car stuff. And that's it. So eventually, in a sense, Unknown Armies became sort of semi-diceless. But the dice were still there waiting to be rolled, and some people are like, okay, well, just roll. And the game isn't set up for that. Your character the game gains a huge whiff factor if you roll for everything. Right? And some people just forget that you're not supposed to roll for everything. See, when it comes down to it and then you hear about these game sessions where we played 3 game sessions and didn't roll a single die. We were just so in character. And, you forget about the social skills. The social skills written on the paper, not actual social skills that people have. Some people, some games have developed very complex social combat rules. And I'm sure some people like them and some people are very grateful for them, especially if you get like a room of those old school nerds who, want to play a character who can seduce a barmaid, but no one at the table understands what it's like to have a woman like you. No, no, no. But seriously though, it's you get these games where people just don't roll dice because they're just, you know, the dice are forgotten. Like, oh, my character does this. Okay, well, this happens, and they respond in this way. Okay, well, my character, and it's back and forth and back and forth, and then, well, and then like a lot of games have what I've heard called the whiff factor, which is basically, you create, maybe a poorly designed game. You create a ninja who is the absolute master of the ninja sword. He drops down out of the shadows and attacks his victim, and then whiff, his sword hits air because the and because he wasn't going against anyone particularly badass, but he just rolled poorly and whiff. It's and then like the advocates of dice will say, well, of course you need some chance of failure. Well, yeah, if you're going up against but attacking a helpless person who is not even on your skill level, it would be like rolling to walk downstairs. At some point, do you? So, what the answer is? Well, don't make him roll. Eventually, don't make him roll becomes common enough that you have to wonder, are the dice even necessary? And and the diceless games basically say, no, they're not. You have, it all comes down to GM fiat, and there are some people out there who greatly fear GM fiat. They use it like almost like a dirty word, like, oh well, we don't want to leave that up to GM fiat because, what if you get a terrible GM? Well, then don't play with that guy anymore. It's like Monty Cook said at one point that he stopped designing games for assholes, and that to me was kind of an eye-opening statement because you don't realize. I think, at least me, a lot of people I think have an inner asshole that that guy, that voice in their head, that when you're reading a rule set and you say, oh yeah, the asshole, what if an asshole came up and abused this rule? We need to change that rule just in case we get an asshole, even though there's no assholes at my table. It's a very insidious, and you want to and so the rules take over, and you're trying to create. On the one hand, you've got this one group that's just talking back and forth and coming up with cool stories and cool characters and cool worlds without having to worry about rules or dice or anything. And on the other hand, you've got people who are rolling for everything and trying to figure out how to make the rules better and better and better so that rolling for everything will make everything work perfectly. I'm not anti-rules. I'm not anti-rolling. It's just that, you just don't want it to take over. You don't want it to. They should assist the story instead of becoming the purpose of the game itself. And I've probably been rambling at this point, but basically, you get like a game like Amber Diceless, which I played back in the day. And then you also got the new Lords of Gossamer and Shadow, which is kind of a modern day reskinning of Amber Diceless to get rid of the copyrighted elements. And it's a lot better in some ways, and it's not as good in others. I like it a lot, though. But it's like, I used to run it, and I played it a couple of times. And it was great, because even, it was like, you didn't have rules munchkins trying to bend the rules, because you as the game master were arbitering the rules, and you're saying it's not meant to work that way. And he can't just, stack on modifiers until his roll becomes unbeatable, because, and ultimately, Diceless, I think, is best for very powerful characters. Most of the Diceless games I've seen tend to have demigods who succeed at almost everything. So there's not really much question of does he succeed. Yeah, he usually does, unless he's going up against someone on his level, So that way, like, okay, some thugs attack you in an alley. Well, I will pull out my sword and defeat them handily. I let them live. I'm feeling merciful. You can't do that in a lot of games. You have to actually start rolling, and you don't get that feel of your character as a badass who graciously allowed them to live. No, you're rolling, and it becomes less a story and more of a game. That's another thing. I talked about the swoosh factor, in which where when you roll for initiative, you stop telling a story and start playing a tactical game. And when there's no dice, the combat is part of the story. You're describing it, and if you're clearly better, then you win. If they're clearly better, then they win, and maybe you were foolish for facing that person. And but but at the same time, he doesn't have to fudge the dice to let you live. He can just say your enemy mocks you and graciously wounds you and sends you on your way. It becomes a part of the story. Your character can still die, but it becomes, if he's foolish or if he sacrifices himself dramatically or in any number of ways. But these aren't games where the sole goal is survival. You can survive. You can survive forever and still fail at everything. Anyways, that was me just rambling on about Diceless games. I think the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do an actual full review on Lords of Gossamer and Shadow. That is, which is something I think is a cool game, and I'd like to talk about it and compare it to its originator, Amber Diceless, and what's different and what's better and what's worse. But for now, I'll see you guys later.